Good evening, friends. 20 years ago, if you wanted to know anything about Friends beyond your local meeting, it was black and white. Black ink, white paper. That applied to books, magazines, journals, newsletters, everything, black and white on paper. And then color started seeping in a little bit. But then suddenly, the words leapt up off the page. And we had Quaker videos, Quaker podcasts. And right at the forefront of this revolution was John Watts. John created Quaker Speak for Friends Journal. And that introduced a lot of friends to the use of the internet for sharing information. I think that of all his accomplishments, John is most responsible for the fact that even old gray-haired Quaker ladies and gentlemen can sit scrolling on their iPhones. John will speak out of the silence. When he's done, if we could go back into silence, he will take questions after a period of break.
Testing. Good evening, friends. Thank you, Paul, for that introduction and for being my microphone guinea pig. When I was a student at Guilford College, we used to have guest speakers come and speak to us as students, and one of the most memorable guest speakers we had was Melanie Widener. She's a Quaker artist. And I remember one time she gave a talk, and she started out the talk by saying, I don't have any of this planned. I'm in the hands of the Spirit, and that's always gone okay so far. But maybe this is the one where it doesn't work out. Deeply resonate with that, so I'd like to ask that you hold me in the light this evening. So I'd like to start with a story. This is something that happened to me when I was 25 years old. The year was 2009, and I was a singer-songwriter. I was sort of finding my voice as a Quaker and as a singer-songwriter, and so I tried my hand at writing a song about growing up Quaker. It was called "Friend Speaks My Mind." And I wanted to try out this really newfangled thing. Everyone was telling me as a singer-songwriter that I should try this new thing that no one had ever heard of yet. It was called YouTube. And what my friends were telling me was that anyone could upload a video to this website, and that anyone could go and watch it. I thought that sounded pretty cool. So I made a music video for this song, Friend Speaks My Mind. And the idea of the music video was that it would be an unprogrammed, silent Quaker meeting for worship. And I would rise out of the silence of this meeting for worship and start giving this song as my vocal ministry. And then someone behind me started playing the drums, someone else stood up and started playing the trumpet, and then it turned into a full-on dance party. Let me play you just a snippet of it. Can't talk about it and not play it. Let's see. Oh, I think we didn't plug in the audio, is that right? They were birds coming out of my laptop. Is this going to be really loud when I plug it in? I'll wait for the tech folks so I don't deafen you. Stop at that line. We'll come back to that. Begging Max Carter just to tell me some more is good foreshadowing for the rest of my talk. So I posted this video online, and you know, I had like maybe 200 people on a newsletter list as you know, as a singer-songwriter. Sent it out to them. I had maybe 50 subscribers on YouTube. That was feeling pretty good. And I went on a camping trip. And I came back three days later, you know, hoping some people had watched it. I went and signed into my YouTube account and checked it, and it had 40,000 views. When I looked at the comments section, there were people from all over the world, Quakers, who were saying, "I love this video." And there were Quakers saying, "I hate this video." And then there was a third type of commenter who was saying, "Oh, this Quakerism thing looks pretty cool. I think I'd kind of like to try it." Of course, I had to respond to those comments and say, not every Quaker meeting looks like that one. So let me rewind a little bit, because this was a huge light bulb moment in my life, which has led me into the work that I'm in today, and that I'd like to talk with you a little bit about. So I grew up in a small, intentional Quaker community in Richmond, Virginia. It was 6 families that bought land together and decided to raise their kids as Quakers. I was blessed with all of these Quaker siblings growing up. I went to the Baltimore Yearly Meeting summer camping program. I was a camper at Catoctin and a counselor at Shiloh, and I went to Teen Adventure. If any of you are familiar with, sometimes I get a little woo with it. There we go. I went to the Baltimore Yearly Meeting Young Friends program, where we would have these sort of lock-ins at local meetings and spread sleeping bags out all over the meeting house and conduct all of our business as high schoolers in these giant cuddle puddles. And we played a lot of Wink. So when it came time to choose a college, I was really clear that this was an experience that I wanted to continue. This was my community, this was my spiritual community, and my social community, and my summer community, and the community that I'd grown up with. In terms of my spiritual education, what I remember about First Day School and the Young Friends programs were that there was a deep emphasis on the individual spiritual experience. We didn't talk about theology much, and I had these deep relationships with mentors. But I knew as much about sort of world religions as I knew about Christianity and about the origins of Quakerism. So when I chose Guilford College and the Quaker Leadership Scholars Program, what I didn't know was that this program had been designed to take Quakers like me, from the liberal FGC branch, and from the FUM branch, and from the evangelical branch, and create an encounter. So the first field trip that we went on, I was a freshman, doe-eyed and excited about my college experience, ready to meet my new Quaker community, and we went on a field trip to Pastoral Friends Church. And if you've ever been to a Pastoral Friends Church, of course there's a pastor at the front of the room. This particular one, everyone was facing forward. That was new for me as a Quaker. There was a Christian flag and an American flag at the front of the room, and there was a choir. So I had some questions. I had some questions on my first day of this experience. I had some questions, certainly, about whether these folks were Quaker, and I had questions about my own Quakerism. Why was I just learning about this for the first time? And what had been missing in my upbringing? What could I learn from these new kinds of Quakers that I was encountering, theologically and in terms of practice? And I went through a period of deep questioning of my own Quakerism. I stepped away from the religion for a little while, as I think all young people should do at some point. And when I came back, what I knew was that I have a lot to learn. I knew that I didn't know yet. And so I went to Max Carter, my mentor at Guilford College, and I said, I know about my upbringing, and I know that there are Quakers out there that are much different from me. But I want to know where it all came from. How did this whole thing get started? Tell me the stories of the early friends. And if you've ever met Max Carter, the man has been waiting his entire career for a student to come to him and ask him those questions. So Max told me, of course, the stories of George Fox and of Margaret Fell. But he also told me some new stories that I hadn't heard before that were exciting and challenging and scary. He told me the story of James Naylor, who was the early Quaker who rode on a horse into the city of Bristol in a reenactment of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, and he was tried in front of Parliament as a blasphemer and had a bee emblazoned in his forehead. He told me the story of Solomon Eccles, who became one of my favorite early Quakers. Solomon Eccles was a professional Baroque composer, so he wrote classical music professionally. If you're familiar with that time period, the 17th century, Baroque music was very frilly, lots of powdered wigs and horses and carriages and things like that. And Solomon Eccles, when he became a Quaker, for that very reason, that the Baroque music was sort of culturally frivolous, but also because Quakers believed at the time that if we're going to sing, we should sing out of the moment, out of the spirit. When Solomon Eccles became a Quaker, he took all of his violins and manuscripts and he burned them in a public square in London. And as a musician, I thought the only good response to that was to write a song about it. So I wrote a whole album. My senior year of college, I wrote an album about these early friends. And it was my convincement experience. I would call myself sort of like a cultural Quaker up to that point. Community meant so much to me. But I hadn't developed my own understanding of why I'm on this path yet. So when I became convinced, it felt like everything changed. The world laid out for me, my own path laid out for me in a much more clear way. As faithful Quakers, we see ourselves as just that, listening for the Spirit, as being of service, as taking the next step as we're led. And so that changed everything for me. It changed my vocational trajectory, it changed my relationship with music. And it was at that very point that I went back and tried to tell my story of growing up Quaker and then discovering these new stories of friends. So I'm going to play a little bit more for you of this video.
Like everybody, the Quakers had to split, but just don't blame our biases for all our problems. We're this society of friends, it's time we acted like it and start to work together just to try and solve them. So all you friends in the meeting house, put your hands up and then twist them at the wrist like you just got out of handcuffs and clap for me. You gotta clap silently, that's how you clap for me. You gotta clap silently, I'm not a Christian. But
Okay.
So everybody's tuning into this dance party, and they're responding to the energy, they're responding to the sort of like accessibility of it, and they're responding to the lyrics. And the chorus of this song is, "I'm not a Christian, but I'm a Quaker. I've got Christ's inner light, but he's not my savior." And it's taken me 20 years to just unpack why I wrote that at the time, but I got an earful from people who heard that, and it either deeply represented them or deeply did not represent their understanding of Quakerism. And so I had this light bulb moment. Which is that we're encountering each other through this new technology. That these Quaker communities that have been siloed since the splits are now encountering each other online, and we're trying to figure out what to do about each other. And then there's this other thing that's happening, which is that it's not just an internal conversation. That people discovered us through this just litany of inside jokes that I turned into a song. And so, what was my responsibility to that? I put the song up hoping that people would download it from iTunes at the time, and I would make my whatever, 3 cents on the dollar that songwriters make on downloads. But if I'm to be of service to the world, to the Religious Society of Friends, it's not. This went way beyond selling a couple of songs. This is a lot of people's first encounter with Quakerism, or with another part of Quakerism. And so I had another idea. The possibility of this platform to reach out, to educate, to challenge, to stir conversations just couldn't be ignored. A few years ago, in 2013, I had the idea for a Quaker YouTube channel. I would travel around and interview different Quakers and publish a new video each week on a different Quaker topic. Some of you in this room are subjects of those videos. You might recognize some people. So in 2013, I launched the Quaker Speak YouTube channel. I did begin releasing videos every week that year. And for 6 years, I traveled around and interviewed friends and told these stories online and watched how people respond to our stories. It's really interesting when you're making YouTube videos full-time. You're mostly sitting in a room alone, editing just tons and tons of footage. And it's a lot different than my sort of singer-songwriter days where I got to stand in front of an audience and feel, when a joke is funny or when a song is good. All you have when you're doing an internet ministry is numbers. You just see how many people clicked on it, how long they watched it for, what continent they were on, what browser they were using, way too many numbers. But you can also see how they found it. You can see what they searched for. So I started becoming sort of a nerd of keywords and search results. I was like, okay, if somebody puts Quaker in the search bar and they're not looking for the oats, what did they put in there? And so I started out with some of these basic questions that people were asking. I will play you a little snippet of this one. This is pure keyword research here. And I'm going to feature Max because he gives Earlham a little shout out at the beginning.
An old professor of mine at Earlham College in Earlham School of Religion, Hugh Barber, once wrote a book called The Quakers in Puritan England. And it places the first Quakers within the context of the Puritan Revolution in England in the mid-1600s. Hugh described Quakers as left-wing Puritans. They out-Puritaned the Puritans.
So that's one style. Is this still working? Check. Testing. Hello. Okay, I'm back. So this is the style of Quaker Speak videos. There's a little sort of opening sequence, and then we answer your question in the course of, I usually try to get them under 5 minutes. That one was 7.5. But answer the question, but also invite you more deeply into the conversation. Give you some more questions to work with. There was another sort of genre of these videos that I was going for, which was stories of modern friends who have been faithful to a powerful leading. My hope is that someone who has a basic question like this, were Quakers Puritans? Lots of people Googling that. You can see it has 28,000 views. Might then watch another video. Here's an example. This is an interview that I did with a fellow named Jay O'Hara. I'll let him start, and then I'm going to tell this story. I love it.
We had no idea that we were supposed to get a lobster boat until we ended up with a lobster boat. And then that became the symbol of like this little white lobster boat in front of this big hulking black ship of coal. We opened ourselves to a place of love and humility, knowing that we were supposed to be there, but not having any sense of anger or opposition.
So this video is called Why I Blockaded 40,000 Tons of Coal with a Lobster Boat. Jay O'Hara is a Quaker in New England, lives on Cape Cod, right across, within sight of the largest coal-burning power plant in New England. It's called Brayton Point Power Plant. So he'd watch these huge shipments of coal coming in every day. And he had a leading from the Spirit. He took it to his meeting. He had a clearness committee. And him and another friend took this tiny little lobster boat out there into the bay. You can see in the picture here. And they dropped a giant anchor that they couldn't pull up themselves. Too heavy for them to pull up. And then they flew a flag that said, "Burning coal is stupid." So it took the Coast Guard all day to pull the anchor back up. So they slowed down the machinations of this coal-burning power plant for a single day. The part of the story that gets to me is that when I asked Jay what he thought the outcome of this would be, and what he thought would happen to him and his friend, he said, I had no idea. I had no idea. We knew that there would be negative repercussions for doing this. And we didn't even know if we could slow it down for a single day. But we knew this is what we were being called to do. And the Spirit doesn't always give you the results in advance. So they were charged with something pretty scary. They were facing jail time. And when it came time for the local district attorney to arraign them, he called a press conference instead. And he said, I'm not going to charge these guys because burning coal is stupid. it began a series of protests at the Braden Point power plant, and 2 years later they shut their doors. So more than 10,000 people have watched this video. It's the Henry David. I don't know if they're... Henry David T. Yeah.
And that's exactly what you did, but it looks like the name may be, Jay may have brought the name. I'm not sure if that's back in the vote or a poster on it. I want to ask him.
You'll have to watch the video. It's on YouTube. So now, wherever I go, I do a lot of talks like this. Last summer I was at Intermountain Yearly Meeting and did a little Intermountain energy here, and did Australia Yearly Meeting, and I travel around doing listening sessions at monthly meetings, and inevitably someone comes up to me and says, "I thought I recognized you from the end of those videos that I've been watching, and this is like my first day at this meeting." And they always talk about this video. So another Solomon Eccles story. I just like to weave them in here every so often. Solomon Eccles, once he became a Quaker and he was no longer a composer, he became a shoemaker. This is, 1650s, 1660s. And early Quakers had this thing that they did called interruption, where they would go into this big, ornate Anglican worship service that everyone was paying their taxes to and was required to be participating in on a Sunday morning. And Quakers would sometimes walk up the aisle and start arguing with the pastor theologically. And often they would get themselves arrested. And sometimes they would win the argument, and people would stand up and leave the church with them on the Sunday morning. Solomon Eccles had his own take on this practice. He would take his shoe cobbling materials into the Anglican church on the Sunday morning, and he would walk up the aisle during the sermon and sit down in the pulpit and start making shoes. And in one church, he got arrested for doing this. And when he came back the following Sunday to do it again, the local police officer, the constable, was waiting for him to come in. And so he somehow snuck in the front door, but they were chasing him quietly through the church. And he got up on top of the pews and was hopping across the pews, trying to get to the pulpit so that he could make shoes during the worship service. So I recently got to talk with someone who I've been wanting to interview for a very long time. Because I've had this question. Those early friends who were doing this courageous, sometimes silly, sometimes a little bit of both, confrontation with the culture, what would they make of the internet? What, I think, Georgia, are you in here? Yeah, Georgia. In a recent podcast, that's Georgia, our podcast producer. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But Georgia, in a recent episode, said, "What would George Fox tweet?" I think he would have trouble with the character limit, honestly. But so I got to talk with this professor whose name is Dr. Kate Peters. Kate Peters did her PhD on Quakers and print culture. And I was surprised to learn so much from this conversation with Kate. I want to play you just a snippet of it and then share a little bit of my reflections here. Let's see.
They're very contemporary, so they're responding to everyday events. So they're a bit like the internet. Now, in the 18th century onwards.
Pamphlets were also more responsive than previous forms of printing.
They're very contemporary, so they're responding to everyday events. So they're a bit like the internet now, in that something happens, somebody can write a pamphlet about it, you can have it circulated within a few days, sometimes within a few hours.
So the whole country is experiencing this time of tremendous upheaval. A civil war ends with the execution of the king and ushers in a period of religious toleration where suddenly anyone with access to a printing press can print whatever they want, no holds barred. Lots of groups jump onto the opportunity to get the word out about their theology, but the Quakers stood out.
Where the Quakers are interesting, I think, in that model is that they're quite young. They're young men. They're in their early 20s. And young women as well. So it means that they've grown up in that, a bit like teenagers now with the internet, that's all they've known. These are young men who have known printing as a mode of communication since they were young. That's what they've seen. So they're very savvy about how they're going to use print. So if we think about how long it's taken, Puritans to start using print polemically, the Quakers do it within, a couple of weeks. Hey presto, off they go.
So I asked Kate, what motivated early Quakers to publish so prolifically, and what was strategic about their publishing?
So I think if we think about where the significance of pamphleteering up until that point, Quakers are doing the same thing with their pamphlets, bringing their message of the universal light of Christ being within everybody. That's not a straightforward message to give to people in 1652 or 1653. So many people will find difficulties with that. One of the difficulties is this blasphemy? Are they claiming that they are actually, they have Christ within them, or that they are Christ? So it's not possible for Quakers to preach their message without getting into trouble.
Interesting. So we've got a period in England when there's tremendous upheaval. There's political upheaval. There's social upheaval. And there's this brand new communications technology that young people are all over. I want to try something out on you. This is something new for me in giving a public talk. It's something that I've been sort of working out in private conversations. Let's see how it goes. You know how they say a broken clock is right twice a day? Well, if we flip that on its head, and say that here we are, Quakers, trying to be faithful to the Spirit, trying to keep this light burning of simplicity and pacifism, and the culture is just doing all this wild stuff out there, right? And occasionally, every so often, they line up. And what we're up to as friends is in vogue. It happened in the 1650s. We went from 0 to 60, right? In a couple of decades, there were no Quakers, and then there were 60,000 Quakers. I want to say that there was another recent example of that, which was during the Vietnam War. That's when my parents joined Quakerism. And what that leads me to believe is that they're coming. They're coming back around. And as we see in the coming decades, tremendous upheaval, climate change, political upheaval, social upheaval, people are going to come looking for us. They already are. And so how can we be ready for them? How can we make sure they find us and they find what they're looking for? I can't answer all of those questions, but I do know one of them. How are they going to find us? Yeah. So I'm starting something new. This is a project that just began last year. It's called The Quaker Project. The, of course, being something that was originally a revolutionary term for Quakers. Quakers would call everybody the, when in the 17th century, if someone was above you in social status, you weren't supposed to call them the, you were supposed to call them you. And of course, the has transformed into a term of affection between friends nowadays. Love it when people call me the, wow. And Quaker is a name that was given to us as an insult because we were too fervent. And then we took it on with pride. We think if you're listening deeply enough and you're listening for the motions of the Spirit, then yeah, you're going to quake. So this practice for me of sitting across from someone else and doing an interview with them, whether it's on audio or video, I'm inviting that energy. I'm saying, what canst thou say, the Quaker? What is it in this moment that the Spirit is giving you that's causing you to quake? Because if that's what we publish online, if we're faithful to that, then when it comes time for people to find us, they're going to find us. So this The Quaker Project, it's an ecosystem of different online media projects. The idea is that everybody has their own thing online, their own way of consuming media, whether you're watching YouTube or you're listening to podcasts or you're wanting a daily devotional or something like that. We've got all three. And we are a year into the podcast. We now have thousands of listeners. And I'm really happy to say that our podcast producer, Georgia, is here. That's my second introduction to Georgia. But Georgia is going to be around on campus in the next couple of days with her tape recorder. And so if you see Georgia come up to you with her tape recorder, that is for the podcast. And I hope that you'll participate in that. We just launched a project that's called the Daily Quaker Message. This is something that anyone can sign up for. And in just 2 months, we've already had about 1,500 people sign up for it from all over the world. We got a comment the other day that this woman says that she comes down, she makes coffee, and she reads the Daily Quaker Message because she knows that thousands of other Quakers all over the world are doing the same thing at the same time. This is the Daily Quaker Message from April 4th. It's a Thomas Kelly quote. There's a way of ordering our mental life on more than one level at once. On one level, we may be thinking, discussing, seeing, calculating, meeting all the demands of our external affairs. But deep within, behind the scenes, at a profounder level, we may also be in prayer and adoration, song and worship, and a gentle receptiveness to divine breathings. So what is it that we're offering the world? What are people going to come looking for, and then what are we going to give them? I like to think at those two different levels, because someone Googled, were Quakers Puritans? But they're looking for more than information about that. They probably have a deeper question about us. And in that way, I like to think when someone comes and is looking for simplicity or for peace, for stewardship, that we can lead with that. Yeah, those are fruits of our listening. And at this other level, there's something really profound happening that we want to invite you into.
Based on my limited understanding, we are amazingly powerful. Whether we get it or not, we are extremely powerful. And often, we feel powerless. Anywhere from depression to anxiety to whatever. You know, we are feelers. When I listen, when I really listen, I am listening to hear God speak. I am listening for God's voice, God's signal. What that means to me is the signal that moves me to aliveness, the signal that allows me to feel the fullness. And when I speak, I am not frivolous with my words because I recognize that my words are power. Henceforth, Christ was known as the Word of God because my judgment is he truly understood the power of word, the power of speaking. So I listen so that I know where I am, where I don't want to be, what's possible, to be touched, called, formed. And when I speak knowing that I'm working with God's power. And that when I speak, I want to speak in a way that facilitates healing, that facilitates blessing, that facilitates wholeness, that facilitates creative possibility for integration. My concern is we don't listen to each other. And it creates the world we see. It creates the world we experience. People not being heard, not being seen, not being appreciated, not being valued, not being recognized. People not being recognized for that of God that dwells within them. Not seen, not recognized, not reclaimed and embraced. Wholeheartedly embraced. And so we fragment. We become broken because we are not seen for who we really are. So the body breaks. It just breaks. The positive news, that's the sad news. That's the sad news. So how about some happy news? The happy news is at any point in time, we can take our power back. We can fine-tune, rehome, calibrate our capacity to hear and recognize each other. And so my belief is there's a way of listening. And Quakers have this conversation, this belief or this sentence, listening each other into wholeness. That we have the capacity to listen each other into wholeness. And we can take that back at any point in time and feel the richness of deep listening, where our heart is actually touched. Deep listening and deep speaking. Yeah. It's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. That's a little teaser for the workshop that I'm going to do tomorrow, which is called Listening Each Other into Wholeness, which is also based on this practice of 6 years of traveling and interviewing friends and inviting the Spirit to come into the room, even with cameras rolling and lights on. It's a tremendous gift that we have as friends. So I don't want to sugarcoat it. When I talk about upheaval, I think we all know and can feel in our bodies what that means for us right now. You just need to open a newspaper. And I think that we're feeling the anxiety of the what's next. This turbulence in the world. It's painful. And I don't want to gloss over it like this global crisis that we can see coming is somehow advantageous to us as a religious society of friends or something. When I spoke with John Calvi, the healer and teacher from New England, and I asked him what part of his Quakerism informs his healing work. He said he thought back to the Quakers who, in the aftermath of World War I, went to Europe and traveled across Europe, cleaning up, feeding people, sorting the living from the dead. He said, that's a good day's work for a Quaker. I recently got to speak with George Lakey. He's a Philadelphia lifelong Quaker activist and was involved in the civil rights movement, and he has taught sociology at Swarthmore College. And he had this really interesting take on it, because he said he categorized the turbulence that we're experiencing as, in part, as polarization. And he said, polarization is extremely uncomfortable. It feels scary. But as a sociologist, when he looked over the history of polarization in cultures, often that's when the most change happened, one way or the other. I want to play you just a little snippet of that conversation with George just to wrap up here, and then we'll do some questions.
So the forge doesn't care what it produces. That's how polarization is. It could not care less the outcome of its impact. And so in Germany, there was enormous polarization in the 20s and 30s, as we know, and the outcome was Hitler and the Nazis. In Italy, again, tremendous polarization in the 20s, and out came Mussolini. Forge doesn't care. It just does its thing. Okay, well, I care. And I'm guessing everyone who hears my voice today hears my caring and cares equivalently. So what we care about can use the opportunity that a social force happens to give us in order to create the beautiful thing, rather than allow the ugly thing to go. Now that means getting our hands dirty, right? I mean, our sculptor friend gets his hands dirty sometimes. We have to be willing to engage in conflict, nonviolent conflict, but still there are a lot of Quakers who hesitate, who draw back from engaging in nonviolent conflict. Guess what? If we're going to be sculptors here, we're going to have to get our hands dirty. That's all right. Let's get into the conflict. It's scary. That's why we have Quaker meetings, so we can do stuff that we could never do alone. It's the solidarity, it's the community provided by Quaker meetings that got Quakers through the 17th century. Else they never would have survived. Because it was one of the more polarized times in British history. And it was also one of the most productive times, right? So we're talking about a theme here that I think just needs to be confronted by everybody who has the feelings that I initially had about polarization. I mean, I still do have those feelings of angst and sadness. My family can tell you, they'll come into the kitchen and I'll be eating my granola and reading the newspaper and crying because it's very sad. The pain that goes with polarization, I'm not wanting to minimize that in any way. I cry about it. I invite you to cry about it. And then get with Quaker friends and others and do something.
So what does doing something look like? For each of us, there's going to be a different answer. The Spirit calls each of us to hold our measure of light. And for me, I'll wait for that to finish. With the experience that I've had, starting with dance party erupts in Quaker meeting for worship, I know what my measure of light is, what I'm called to. It's making sure that when they come looking for us, they've got something powerful to find. Thank you, friends.